Welcome to this podcast on digital responsibility. There's a vibrant community across the world at the moment driving forward corporate digital responsibility, which includes a range of aspects from digital ethics, digital for the environment, sustainability, digital well-being, inclusion, accessibility, and more. My name is Rob Price, one of the founders of Corporate Digital Responsibility back in 2017. If you'd like to know more, have a look at the website corporatedigitalresponsibility.net. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 6 of the Digital Responsibility Podcast, and tonight I'm delighted to be joined by Niniane, the MD of the Swiss Digital Initiative, and Christopher. So Niniane, would you like to introduce yourself and perhaps tell us a bit about the work that you do at the Swiss Digital Initiative?
Thank you, Rob. Thank you for inviting me to this podcast. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. My name is Niniane Paeffgen. I am the Managing Director of the Swiss Digital Initiative. It's a foundation based in Geneva. And the objective of the foundation is actually to bridge the gap between principles and practices. So we want to advance action-oriented ethics in the digital age through very concrete projects. And just to give you a very short background how this initiative or why this initiative was created was because we saw there are numerous principles out there, but all stakeholders are concerned with the same questions. How can we implement these principles into the business practice? And that's what we try to achieve, and that's what we try also to help the different actors in the digital realm. And our very first project is the development of a so-called digital trust label for digital services.
That's great. Do you want to tell me a bit more about because I remember when we talked before, we were talking about certification and badges. How do you give the consumer a greater level of confidence in the way in which they engage and share their data with a particular platform? So how's that going? Where is it now in terms of its development?
Yes, so I mean, a lot of actors and stakeholders in the field are trying to foster digital ethics. There is a huge debate around how can we foster digital ethics, and we even can say there's some kind of digital ethics washing because everyone is somehow involved. But it's such an important question, and we think one measure amongst many others. I think it's not one solution that can solve this issue. One measure can be a digital trust label. So what we want to achieve with the digital trust label, you can imagine it's some kind of a combination between an organic food label and on the other hand, a nutrition fact table. So the idea is really to give the users of digital service more information and transparency. What is actually behind these digital services? So for example, let me give you an example. For example, if you're looking for a job and then you go on the different websites where you find the open job postings, and then you will apply through a digital channel, and then you want to make sure that your data are protected, and you also want to know, for example, is it an algorithm that will screen your dossier, or is it a real person? And the digital trust label exactly wants to give this information. So it wants to make sure that the user, so it breaks down the information to the user, it breaks down the complexity, and it wants to make sure that the user can get the fuller picture than we have today.
It is brilliant, and something we've discussed in the past about the ability to truly communicate with the consumer of a service. It's in a very transparent way, how they should interact with it, whether they should be cautious or open, because we know that individuals will have varying degrees of of openness to these things. They'll say, oh no, it'll be fine, don't worry about it, I trust these things. Or they'll have a default feeling of caution towards technology in these services. So having some sort of intermediator, and for that to be an objective one that says this is our single view of what's right and wrong, it's a really cool concept. In some of the prior research that you guys have done, I was reading through it around the landscape of the digital society. It shows that a lot of these concepts that are coming our way, it could kind of on a sliding scale between challenges and potentials, and that something can be just as much a risk as it is an opportunity for people. And there's so much subjectivity, I suppose, in what's right and wrong. How have you been able to balance and understand truly what a customer should be comfortable with and find that objective answer in what is a very subjective field?
So that's a very good question. So it's an evolving process, and we really wanted to make sure from the very beginning of the development process to involve all key stakeholders. So of course, the experts that were responsible for drafting the criteria catalog of the label, but then in the end we need the business also to adapt it and adopt it in the business practice. And last but not least, the users, because what we took a really user-centric approach. So we said, okay, we want to develop this label for the users, and that's also why we did different researches. And an interesting point that you just mentioned, Christopher, is these different personalities that exist. So there are people, and our research confirmed that there are people, they will always be reluctant to use new technologies because their mistrust is so big, even a label wouldn't convince them to use it. And there are other types of users who say, okay, if they got more information, probably this would incite or would promote more trust towards them. But I think a label can just be only one tool amongst other, because why is there some kind of mistrust? Because of course we saw in the past that probably some companies, they also lost the trust of the public through their non-responsible behavior, and also so it's a mix between the companies, or the digital companies need to earn the trust, and they need to prove that they are trustworthy. So a label could be one tool. And then of course, and we also talked about this just very quickly before, digital literacy is a huge topic as well. Because what we don't know and what we don't understand is something we worry about, or something that might trigger fear. It's something it leaves us a bit insecure. So I think it's also a question of more. If people would know more, if people would be more informed and would have more tools to inform themselves, this in the other turn would probably also help in using these different tools. But as we know, it's not just about using tools and new technologies, but it's more also of a mindset and a cultural shift, I would say.
So it seems there's three key component parts for me. One is consumer demand, so and understanding. So a consumer understanding the certification and what it means, and their level of confidence in that organisation because it's there, the gold, silver, bronze standard, however it's articulated. The second is platform businesses, or indeed kind of broader businesses, being comfortable with that certification and adopting it, and confirming that they are comfortable with being scored that way, and of course then the scoring process itself, so the independence of whatever algorithm or certification process itself, and all three are interlinked. The consumer won't trust the certification process if it's not open and transparent and kind of confidence in its background. The business won't trust it, and therefore, so how are you selling it to the various parties? I'm interested to know how you get critical mass of consumers on board with understanding and businesses on board with their support for that certification process.
Yes, so you outlined in a nutshell the complexity of this project. So it's indeed a very complex project, and it's also, of course, the chicken and egg problematic, that it's something that never existed before. It's something that's evolving, that also needs to earn trust. So we need to make sure that we get things right from the very beginning. On the other hand, it's also a process. So what we really also want to live, and we are in the learning process. We are in a very different place where we were 1 year ago, and it's an evolving process. And what we want to make sure is that we are transparent. That we are also transparent about our learnings. Probably, if we have to correct assumptions, etc. I mean, this is all part of the process. So I think the best recipe for a label, anyways, in the analog world, and not in the digital world, but I think it's more of a dialogue, and we need to have the different stakeholders on board. So it's really it's a common project between different stakeholders, from the business side, from the academia, but also from civil society, which is very important and critical that they are on board as well, because we cannot trust define as a foundation. We really need all stakeholders on board, because it's a topic that concerns everyone and all stakeholders. And that's I think how we want to make sure that this trust label is trustworthy, and this also earns really the name as well.
Yeah, and that phrase you used, critical mass, well, but I guess success for the initiative might mean that one day all of a sudden, if people don't see a digital trust label next to a website or a digital service, then they'll ask questions as to why it's not there. I suppose that might be success.
In the long term, that would be the vision, of course. But we also have to be realistic. I think no label that we know today that everyone knows was created within a few days and months. So it's also it's a long-term process, and we also decided to take a more iterative approach, so to test and redesign and test and redesign. So it won't be perfect from the very beginning, and then we need to make sure that we learn. As I say, it's a learning process, and then we adapt.
I guess government and regulation starts to play a role as well, as we see, for example, these days you can't go on a website without being asked if you want to accept cookies, so much so that I think the meaning of that is slightly lost on a lot of people now. It's just something that they accept when they get onto the website, or otherwise. That wouldn't have been around so many years ago if it hadn't been regulated or made an important requirement. So I wondered if you'd received any backing or any interest from government bodies or regulators of the digital world for this piece of work.
So you mentioned also a really important point, because of course a label is some kind of a soft law instrument. It's not really binding. You don't have to apply it, but it should also, be an instrument for companies to show that they are going probably the extra mile than what is already required by law. And so we believe, and we also want to have the government on board for this project. I think it's very important that, as I said, that all key stakeholders are behind some kind of a digital trust initiative.
And I'm interested in terms of the scope of the initiative. Is this for businesses that are Swiss, businesses that operate in Switzerland, or indeed any business with which a Swiss citizen or consumer might interact with at any stage? Or I imagine it's in part, it will evolve as indeed the program. But where's your focus in terms of the businesses that you're engaging with at the moment?
So that is also a big question that was discussed internally a lot. So for right now, we are, of course, it's an initiative based in Switzerland, in Geneva. We have key stakeholders from Switzerland on board. So the very first pilot of the label will have a Swiss focus, but our ambition is to, of course, to scale it to a more international level, and to see, for example, with like-minded organizations to further develop it so that it becomes a truly global label, but it's also a long-term ambition.
And in the conversations that you've had, have you come across other countries or other organizations in other countries that are doing similar things, or potentially could align with the work that you're doing?
Yes, so what we saw, actually, we saw there are, we have identified over the last months, we have identified a lot of different organizations and projects, initiatives, which are doing something similar. So everyone is is trying to find solutions, how can you make technology more accountable, more transparent? How can you give more information? There are a lot of stakeholders, for example, that are working on some kind of AI audit or AI certification, but also in the field of IoT and cybersecurity. And we have mapped all these initiatives because we also wanted to see, probably, is there someone else that has already done something similar? So we mapped with this global landscape of certification and labeling schemes, and we have mapped around 50 of them, and we're also in contact with numerous of them. It's so far, we haven't identified one organization that is exactly doing the same. But what was really interesting was the exchange and talking to these different people, and to see that actually everyone struggles with the same questions. Everyone has a bit the same learnings. And so we saw that it would actually add a value if we can, first of all, give an overview of what is already there. And here also it's an evolving landscape. It's a very dynamic field. And on the other hand, to bring these initiatives more together, to foster the collaboration of this ecosystem, and so that we don't need to start from scratch in other countries. And so we are currently, we just started last week, or we had a kick-off event, a kick-off workshop on this label and certification efforts. And we want to continue to foster this dialogue in an online format and through also a communication channel. But we really want also our aim would be to bring these together in Geneva by the end of the year, depending the whole health situation.
I think the thing for me with a lot of these conversations, and it's brilliant that you've identified 50 kind of related projects, programs. But of course, the ideal would be that there is some kind of stronger synergy between them, and from a consumer point of view, rather than, and I'm not suggesting for a moment that there would be 50 different badges or schemes that are out there, but some uniformity within that, or it would be great from a citizen perspective. At the same time, I'm very conscious that when in the past organizations have looked at standard unifying standards, for example, it takes forever, and we haven't got forever. This is something that we need to kind of make progress on faster. So I think my question is, how do we accelerate it? What would be really helpful from your point of view that would help shorten that set of activities that you're doing from being several years to being a year? How could you achieve something better within a year? What would be your ask for everyone listening, for example?
So I mean, I can only speak for what we are doing. We are also trying to find the balance between, as you said, the speed, but also at the same time to make sure that the criteria are, standing for a certain, or represent a certain standard. And it's a challenge, because of course there are some stakeholders who say no, you need at least 3 years before you can go out, and there are others who are like, okay, we need something now. I think, but of course, as I said, we haven't launched the label yet, but as we see it today is this iterative approach, so that we start somewhere, that we test, and that we share the learnings we do along the way, that others can learn from ourselves. And then of course we also call other for other stakeholders or initiatives out there who would like to collaborate on this, to probably try it out in their environment, in a different, I don't know, country, for example, or a different with different companies and digital services. They are welcome to test. So I think it's really this probably the best balance is in just trying out things, test it, adapt it, and then moving forward, share the learnings, and going forward with that, without being, of course, perfect. We are not perfect, I think.
And I think that's such a key thing. And when we originally defined corporate digital responsibility, at the heart was trust. And this works with trust. And you're so right to say you can't just kind of launch something and hope that people will believe it. You have to find a way of ensuring consumer trust and belief, but at the same time making sure you've got the businesses on board as well.
Exactly, and it's actually to be also very transparent here. It's to align these different perspectives is of course a very complex task in itself, because the interests are very different. On the same time, I think they'll align more and more, because we see that user awareness is growing. And in the end, for example, for the big tech companies, what makes them most valuable are the users. So it's also in their interest to have the trust of their users.
Absolutely. And I've been accused of being the doom bringer in the past, when I've suggested that the best way to accelerate this and almost create a pull of society for this kind of capability, rather than seeking to push it on them, is for some, unfortunately, a bad event to occur where society sees the need for that enhanced trust. That we're not just in the day-to-day lives, but something happens and it leads us to need this solution to support us going forward. It's how I feel personally. It might unfortunately become a mainstream element, and hopefully we can instill the right behaviors. That was going to be my final thought on the topic, really. Even the existence of the digital trust label and the 50 other initiatives out there, each of those initiatives are taking the steps to outline what good behavior and an ethical digital transformation looks like for these organizations, and gives them something to target and frame themselves around. And the existence of that in itself is a huge positive, I think, for companies out there, regardless of the mainstream uptake of the label in itself. So it's really positive, and it's been fascinating to hear about it today, Niniane.
Thank you.
So just in terms of kind of final wrap up, I just wanted to say thank you, Niniane. I know that kind of the things that you're doing will resonate with many of the people who will listen. And it is an important step forward as we try and give people greater confidence that their personal data is being used in appropriate ways, and that the way in which the organizations that they interact with is done in a way that aligns with their values and trust. So I wanted to congratulate you and everyone else who's working on the initiative. As a final thought, just for everyone else who's out there, what would you ask that everyone does something different kind of in the next few months of the year to help move that kind of trust forward? What would your final thought be?
And you mean the trust in general, or the trust label?
The trust labels, principles of it,
Okay.
and improving digital trust in the relationships with organizations.
So I mean, what I would call for is to collaborate more together, so to foster the collaboration between the various stakeholders, because that's what we have seen and experienced in the previous months, is that the perspective on these principles vary, not only from country to country, but also stakeholder to stakeholder. And I think there's one consensus that something needs to be done, and we need to use new technologies to benefit from its potential. But on the other side, there are also which with everything in life, there is also a downside, and to steer also these risks associated with new technologies, we need to have some standards. And for that, I think it really, for us, what is key to this is the collaboration and the multi-stakeholder approach, which we try to live ourselves. I don't know if this answers your question.
And I think that's a brilliant answer, because of course, what's this podcast about? It's about sharing the work that is happening across the world in areas that relate to digital trust and responsibility. So if somebody kind of contacts you in kind of the next 6 months and 12 months and says, I'd love to know more, I was listening to you on the podcast talk about the work that you're doing, then that's just helped us join the dots a little better than kind of before.
Yes. So, yes, and it would be also a pleasure, because we are also a young initiative, and still building the network and the ecosystem also through, I think the report was the first step we did, but we are also happy to be in touch with all other initiatives, organizations out there doing similar work.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
And thank you, Christopher.